Change is ever present. If you're not changing, then you're not growing. And if you're not growing, then you're dying. In order to lead successful organizations, we as leaders need to master the art of change management. Today, my guest Jen McFarland and I discuss topics such as how she got in change management, how leaders get their people to buy into change, where leaders fail with change management, how to ensure communication is flowing smoothly, benefits of cross-functional teams, and what technological resources for change and project management she recommends. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, episode 66, Leading Change with Jen McFarland. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's your host and founder of the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast, Scott McCarthy. And this is the podcast where if you feel like you don't know where to start as a new leader, if you're looking to expand your knowledge on leadership, or you're just trying to hone your skills, this is the podcast for you. This is where we take real leading experts and sharpen your skills in personal leadership, team leading, and organizational leadership. To all the new listeners out there, welcome. And to all the returning listeners, welcome to you as well. It's definitely great to have you here. Looking forward to this episode today. Before I dive in and start talking about Jen and our topic today, I just want to give you a quick rundown on a few different things going on here at the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. And well, just a few different things going on in general. For those that are subscribed, and you can do so by going to movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe and picking your podcast player of choice, you would have noticed last Thursday a leadership thought episode. Well, not really an episode. So what is this? This is basically what I'm doing is taking my live video that I do in the Moving Forward Leadership Mastermind. And if you're not a part of that, then hop on over at movingforwardleadership.com/mastermind and become a member. Anyway, I take them the live videos that I'm doing there and I'm putting out there for the rest of you to listen to. You know, they're only short, they're only a couple minutes long, but it's just my random thoughts. You know, I'll be putting out about one a week so that the rest of you can listen to. So if you like that, let me know. Shoot me an email, scott@movingforwardleadership.com, or shoot me a message on whatever social media platform that you fancy. And if you're not following me on social media, it's too easy. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com and scroll to the bottom and you'll see all the various social media links there. All right. That's enough of the podcast marketing, as I'll call it. What I wanted to get into today is change and change management. Us as leaders, we need to focus on change because, as I said in the intro, change is ever present. The world is constantly changing. The world's changing right now as I talk. So we need to get on it. And as leaders, you need to be able to, one, know how to implement change, but two, also know how to prepare for it, plan it, execute it, get your teams drawn into it. And that's where I get Jen to come in. Jen is an expert in change management. This is what she does now. She enables other companies and organizations to effectively change. I'm not going to go into her extensive background because she'll do that, and it is a doozy. Everything and anything between volunteering overseas to being a CEO. But she's also a business systems expert, a podcaster, a blogger. She helps hundreds and thousands of businesses to better their business decisions. In general, she has a passion for helping women-owned businesses out there. So if you're a woman leader and you have some definite influence in your business, maybe you can give Jen a shout. And of course, you'll be able to find all the links in the show notes today at movingforwardleadership.com/66. All right, folks. That's all I got for today. Be sure to be on the lookout for the key takeaways I had with my interview with Jen. Those being, you got to plan it out. You need to be actively listening, and you need to figure out the best way to communicate for your organization. Anyway, folks, that's it for me. Sit back, relax, and enjoy my interview with Jen McFarland discussing leading change. Jen, welcome to the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. Great to have you here.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
So the first thing I always like to do with all my guests is get them to just, Cole's Notes version, their background, who they are, where they're from, how they got to where they are today. If you can sum that up in a Cole's Notes version, because I know we were just talking and you're like, oh, I'm pretty chatty. So we don't we actually want to get to the goods at some point, right?
That's right. So let me just say, I'm originally from Boise, Idaho. And I've lived in Kazakhstan for 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer. And now I'm in Portland, Oregon. And I've done so many different things, from being a radio DJ to working in a warehouse to being, like I said, a Peace Corps volunteer in Kazakhstan, to writing policy and working on dismantling institutional racism. And then for the last couple of years, I've had my own gig. And the one constant among all of the things that I've done is helped people implement change, because change can be hard. It's simple, but not easy.
Change isn't hard. What are you talking about? Change is easy and everybody loves change, right?
No,
not at all. Not one bit. And for the audience out there, they're probably like, Scott, what are you drinking tonight? No, change is hard. People hate change. Everybody resists change. But people like you and I absolutely love it. So why don't we go down a little bit more on that, how you actually got into learning about change management and diving deep into that topic, because it's certainly an interesting one for me, because it involves so many facets, from organizational theory to psychology and everything in between.
Yeah, so a lot of my experience is boots on the ground, tech, project management, and being an executive in that field. And a lot of that is about delivering change to a group of people. So you learn really quickly that the number one thing you can do when you're implementing any sort of change is to talk about it early and often and get buy-in at every level of an organization, because that's how it works. You can't just have one person who's your champion and then nobody else is going with it. And it doesn't matter if you have 10,000 people in your organization or 10. It works the exact same way. It's all about communicating and making sure that people feel valued and heard. And you do all of that well before you start saying, and now the change is happening. Yeah,
I definitely think that whole buy-in thing and talking about it early is crucial, especially even from my background. I'm a military background, so even in our world, most people think, oh, no, military, we just shoot orders and everything happens. Like, not quite at all. I wish it was that easy most days, but it isn't. And that whole buy-in piece is definitely crucial. So,
yeah, I think it is, and I think that first I want to say that when I studied leadership, I have a master's degree in leadership and management. We studied the military a lot, because from a leadership perspective, there is so much that goes on with the military that is beyond, like you said, just here, do this thing. And it's actually what a lot of organizations model after, is how things happen in a military scenario, so that you can figure out how to implement change in your own organization and lead.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I wish I had known that. You guys could have called me up, and I gladly would have done an interview or anything. But oh well, a little bit too late for that, I think. Anyway, moving on. We're talking about this whole buy-in piece. So, what are some practical ways from your experience, from your studies, and really your execution in your previous careers? What are some of the ways that leaders can get their people to buy into change most successfully?
Sure. And I still do a lot of change management now, even with when I work with a lot of women entrepreneurs, and even if it's just one person, man, the change can be so hard, right? And so it's not maybe the sexiest piece of advice, but it is about planning it out. Making sure that whatever it is that you're doing is totally aligned with your goals. Like when I sit down with people now, we talk about, your business goals, like what do you want to happen in 3 to 5 years? And then we talk about this change and how it's aligned, and then the budget and like all of these non-sexy things, because what a lot of times there's like two different kinds of people, right? There's, there's more than two, but in this scenario, there are the people who plan and never want to do anything. And then there are what I like to call the pantsters. And it's like fly by the seat of their pants and they just go. And you can see that in any organization. And the middle way is actually what you want to shoot for. It's someone who's not afraid to execute, but also isn't going to totally maverick through it. It's somebody who's willing to learn and have that structured flexibility is what I call it. So you have to have an underlying structure for what you want to have happen and tie it back to your major goals. But you have to be flexible enough to say, as you learn new information, you're willing to navigate that and change with that. And that's one of the ways that really, with planning and then with buy-in, and then when you start to learn more information, that you can really navigate change and make it successful. But for me, it all starts at the beginning, when you kind of plan it out. And then that's what leads to the successful execution.
Got it. So a few different things there. So I guess what we're really getting down to is when people within an organization see that there's actually a plan afoot for the change, they can see where it's mapped out and basically the different checkpoints along the route to get from point A to point B. This is where they're actually going to get more buy into and say, okay, we're not just flying by our seat of pants. This isn't just some willy-nilly decisions. What we like to refer to in the military is the good idea fairy came up with. Feel free to use that one, by the way.
I like it.
The good idea fairy showed up and all of a sudden we're going from one direction to another with absolutely no plan. So people will buy into something when they actually can see the plan and execute and feel the execution of it. Are there any other way or any other areas where leaders would fail with change management? I assume that one being obviously the inverse of that is a critical misstep. Are there any other key ones that leaders can definitely be aware of, cognizant aware of while they're implementing change as to not do?
Oh, wow. The common pitfalls. I think that, what have I seen? I've seen so much. It's so crazy. Like my brain is just downloading a bunch of different things. I would say that in one regard, it is, when you don't take into consideration the past, and learn from it. I think that's one thing that happens. I think another thing that happens is this idea that you can continue to throw budget and resources, but if you're not aware of like the actual time it's going to take to implement something, I think you have to then that can fail. In project management, there's an iron triangle of time, money, and resources, and you kind of have to have everything has to be in balance. And if it's not, then that's where you kind of see some critical things fall off. But I think it's also about kind of looking at the whole landscape and also listening. So you can have that champion at the top. And then if everybody's telling you that is just not going to work for this reason, that reason, and the other, if the champion's only going to be able to take it so far. And so there has to be some active listening that happens along the way. I would highly suggest having a nerd like me in the room somewhere and not just for tech things, but an analyst who can, or a team of analysts who can look at things and help you make those critical connections, because, not everybody really likes to dig into those details, but successful execution of any sort of change, the devil's really in the details.
No, I definitely like a lot of your points in there, especially the active listening one. I think that's one that is really a big hiccup that a lot of people don't actually do or take full advantage of. And one of the things I've done in the past is, simply what we refer to as walk the lines. You get out and you walk the floor, the shop floor with the guys and talk to them and see what's going on. And all of a sudden you start hearing the bottleneck in production, whatever that production operations is. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, okay, why haven't I heard about this before? Why is it taking me this long to hear about these problems? Or, you're talking about a project and people are like, and you walk the lines, like, yeah, so we're looking at doing this. Like, why do you even bother with that? That's useless. That'll be a complete waste of our time, money, resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that whole active listening thing is so crucial. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a pitfall on many, definitely what I like to refer to as bosses out there, but even, people who like to try to be or learning leadership and are leaders, they're like, oh, I just don't have the time. I don't have time. Well, make the time.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen like these disconnects, right? Like there's a disconnect between, management and the people actually your frontline staff, right? The people actually answering the phones, actually interacting with customers. So the managers are saying, just do the work. We've trained you. This is how it works, which is the role of the manager, right? They're looking at the reporting. They're getting people to do things. And the staff is like, this doesn't work. It takes too long. Customers don't understand. And there can be a critical breakdown at that point. But there can also be a critical breakdown, and I've seen this as well, between an executive team and your management staff. Like there's multiple levels,
Right,
and then
right.
expand it out based on the size of an organization, where people who are further removed from the frontline staff and who haven't actually who manage managers, but maybe aren't listening to what the managers have to say about how the work gets done and whether or not these big hairy goals are actually viable. And so it's like a critical chain. And if you think of communication in an organization as maybe not being a high priority, I would suggest it needs to be elevated, because if you're playing some sort of crazy telephone game, that is where things can really break down. And that is where a lot of new initiatives fail, actually, is by lack of listening. That
whole communication piece, and you just dovetailed nicely into our next topic anyway. But that whole communication piece is critical. And I personally believe, not only just from a change management aspect, but just daily life aspect. If your organization isn't communicating effectively, then guess what? That whole disconnect piece happens. All of a sudden, you got like executives are like, oh, it's sunshine and roses and rainbows and everything is great. All the balance sheets are great. And all of a sudden your frontline staff are like, all our customers suddenly start hating us. And then all of a sudden like, well, where did our revenues go? Gone. And it's 2008 and you're shutting the doors all over again, yeah. Right? So,
I mean, and that can happen like in so many different ways. It's so many different types of organizations and sizes, right? Like there's the person who outsources everything and then suddenly learns they don't have any money.
That's not
that
good.
Person ran off with it or whatever. And so you still have to have your fingers on the pulse, and you have to listen to what's going on, not only hierarchically, but also kind of across an organization. So have those cross-functional teams where they're talking about things so that there's kind of some mutual understanding about how things happen, because then that also makes change work. Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense, and that whole as an organization, grows in its span and depth, because that's basically what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. Communication becomes more and more difficult, right? So, do you have any other tips on how leaders can ensure that communication is flowing smoothly through an organization, especially as when we're referring to in a change situation or even a daily life situation, from your experience?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more, gosh, that's a tough question. 'Cause there are just so many pitfalls, right? Like there's so many, there's actually more opportunities to fail than there are to succeed, I think. And so you can never have too much communication. That said, you don't want it to take too much time. Like I'm a big fan of things like stand-up meetings, where you just kind of, everybody gets a quick tip on like what's going on, and then you break, because I think that spending too much time talking about what we're going to be doing Like that really doesn't work. In terms of productivity, in terms of keeping morale up. A lot of times people just want to get to work. So I find that, it's actually helpful to figure out what the best way is for people to communicate, and then just make sure that people are following through on that. Because otherwise there are a lot of things that can happen, that drop off the table. That everybody's really busy, and if you're not on the same page about what everybody's doing and how everybody affects each other, then that's where the real breakoffs happen. At least from my perspective, I have a lot of experience in tech, so it's the common pitfalls that happen in there is because people tend to think they don't understand the tech aspect of a project. They tend to stall, and they wait as long as possible before letting the technical people come into the room. And then they bring us in and we're like, that's not going to work. And then everybody's like, what are you talking about? And it's like, well, cause that database doesn't talk to the other one. So like, that's never going to happen. And then everybody's brain turns off and they want to just do it anyway. And so there's a lot of times where, especially when you're talking with technical people, where the technical people have to realize that like not everybody is like them, and you have to bridge those gaps. And I think it happens a lot. I think it happens a lot, especially in the technology realm. Mainly because of the people who are super good at that job, tend to like to work alone. And they don't necessarily have to talk to people all the time. And that's where I've always been more of that tech translator, where I talk to the super nerds and then I go talk to the customer and I make sure they are on the same page. So that's where I saw it the most, at least in organizations I've worked in, but it could just be that was the arena that I was in. But I always think that there's somebody on a team, that you stall and don't want to talk to. And I would just encourage you to talk to that person earlier, because what you may be perceiving as that Debbie Downer is actually somebody who knows a lot, that can help you avoid pitfalls, earlier in your process.
It's, you got so many points that I'm kind of like trying not to go on a couple different tangents here, but one that you really hit that actually I haven't really heard it said that way before is the best way to communicate for your organization. I think that's something key that people need to hone in on. Like from my experience, we move around every couple of years, right? So I change jobs, I change organizations so frequently. It's a bit crazy some days. But what we fail to realize is that not the same way to communicate in every organization that doesn't necessarily work for every organization. There's different ways. And I think you kind of hit that, and it's like, wow, it's so true. And it's just like individuals. If you look at an organization from an individual, like two people don't talk the same way, don't have the exact same methods of communication, their body language isn't exactly the same, etc. So that's a really neat point. And I actually have never thought about it that way. And just go back to your whole Debbie Downer thing. I got a quick little story here. When I was in my last job, I was a commander of 200 personnel, and my walk around tour, as I was about to meet someone, people were like, watch out for this guy. And I met him, a guy named Tommy, and Tommy was one of my civilian employees. He was a mechanic, and for 40 minutes he just gave me basically a blasting of crap. You think about that whole hierarchical change. So Tommy's, he's at the bottom, I'm at the top, and he was there for 40 minutes just giving it to me because there were some problems with it, with his section and some of the organizational problems. And it's just those guys, those Debbie Downers, you need those guys that are willing to tell you exactly how it is sometimes, because then you're like, okay, it's not actually rainbows and roses. There are some,
yeah.
some issues here.
I think it's true. And I think that as leaders, we have to discern like the people who are not going to be happy no matter what.
Oh yeah, exactly.
We have to figure out how to handle that, and everybody kind of has their own way, because otherwise they dominate 80% of your time, and then you have so little time for your high performers that they start to leave an organization. Like that happens a lot too. I think that what I was talking about too mostly were like a lot of times when you bring your chief technology officer in, or sometimes it's the money person, right? Like it's like wah wah. Like we had like all these great ideas from the marketing people, and now you're raining on our parade, and you always do that, And so it's more like the people who come in and bring some reality to a particular situation. And one of the things that I advocate for in organizations, again, is things like cross-functional teams and helping people just kind of understand at a high level the lay of the land. Like, and I think that really helps with collaborating on some of these big initiatives, so that you don't wait too long before you bring in somebody who, they might rain on your parade, but then if you do it earlier, then you can be agile and change direction, as opposed to feeling cornered, like you can't do anything else.
So you talked about, cross-functional teams a few times here now. And so I guess my following question is, one, can you just explain for the audience out there what a cross-functional team is exactly? And then two, what are some of the benefits of using those when we're actually looking at change?
Sure. So a lot of times when I've participated in or led cross-functional teams, it's around like a certain initiative, right? You have a big goal that you want to implement, and you know that in order to achieve it, you have to talk to several different players who are across different, they may be partners, they may be different divisions within an organization, they may be people completely outside of your organization. And you bring all of the players together to work as a team and help problem solve around it. It's different than a workshop or something like that. This is like a team that gets together periodically to problem solve around a specific issue and cross collaborate. That's one way. The other way was on a tech project where we have like customers and implementers in the same room. And it's a good solution when you have a lot of misunderstanding and disagreement, to bring people together periodically so that they can hear each other and problem solve together as well. One of the last cross-functional teams that I led at a very large organization was around a highly technical project. I'm from the States, so it was, the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, has very specific rules and regulations around taxes. And I was implementing a program using that information, and there were people who were working with customers had much different opinions than the technology people who were developing the database for how people could look at the information. And so you bring everybody together so that there's some mutual understanding and coming together around how to solve problems. Otherwise, everybody ends up in a siloed situation. And then honestly, nobody's happy because it turns into like a lot of infighting. Whereas if you can have like real discussions and bring people together around what the problems are and kind of solve them. And these are not like frequent weekly meetings. These are like periodic meetings. What you find is people understand like how, how all the bone, like if you think of it like an anatomy or a chain, you start to understand how all the links in the chain come together. And when you bridge those pieces, then you're more likely to get people to acceptance.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really trying to do with change, is bridge gaps to get to acceptance.
We do something very, very similar with us in the military side when we're doing operational planning, right? Because it's very operational planning, believe it or not, it's actually kind of tied with change management and everything that you're talking about. So what we'll have is planning groups, and they're a way of structure, or sorry, I can't talk right now. A headquarters is structure. There we go, Scott. Headquarters is structure. I'm going to leave that in just for fun, guys. I'll say it for a third time. The way the headquarters is structured, there's different specialties, right? There's administration, there's intelligence, operations, logistics, planning, communications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the way we do it is we basically take representatives from all those different sections, put them in a room, and go, okay, away you go, planning. And it's very much like that cross-functional, right? So you got a planning lead, usually we refer to as the J5 or someone in there, and he's the head planner. But there are plans people from all those different sections representing their piece of the pie and solving this problem and the way we're going to go about it. And then what happens is they go back and report back to their bosses, who are like the heads of whatever section they're in. So for me, I'm logistics, so I'll be in there in the planning. I go back and report to the chief logistics officer and say, hey, this is what we're looking at, blah, blah, blah. These are all the different things we're looking at. And he'd give me like the thumbs up. Or am I 2 jobs ago, he basically tear it apart and go back to the drawing board. But it's very much, and it does. It helps that communication. It helps alleviate those silos that are there, because silos will kill organizations. God, they're horrible.
Oh, they're horrible.
They're horrible, but yet so many organizations out there just use them.
I know. And I worked at a horribly siloed organization. I will say the one thing I left out of a cross-functional team is it's ideal if you have people who can make at least some decisions. Like, I'm sure that you were able to make certain decisions right there at the table. And then
Right.
There were other things that you had to report back, or maybe get approval for or whatnot. But it's definitely, for cross-functional teams, you want to have people in the room, that can help move the ball forward.
Absolutely. There's got to be some semblance of some form of delegation in there, which, hey, I'm doing a webinar on right after this podcast interview.
Boom.
Boom. Drop that in. But anyway, yes, there has to be some form of semblance of delegation in there, because if not, the boss might as well just be there themselves.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And, again, I mean, change just doesn't happen alone.
No, not at all. So before we kind of wind it all down, I got a couple last questions here. Obviously, you have a tech background. Do you have any recommendations for technological resources out there for leaders that they can dive into to help them with change and project management? Some things that you feel have worked well in the past, or simply, just stick to the good old whiteboards and pen and paper, or what's your thoughts there?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because I've used a number of different tools, and I had somebody else asking me for recommendations about project management tools. And I always kind of fall back to the same thing, which is, you have to go with what works. And if you're not sure what works, then I highly encourage you test some things out. When I worked in large organizations, I'd use like Microsoft Project, but then nobody else understood it. Right? Right. And you can't really report out if people don't get the tool. So you can have things that you do internally for like project managers, but, I've worked in a lot of places that really respond well to like the whiteboard. I've worked in places, even when I was an executive, where I would have my whiteboard in my office and anybody was, welcome to walk by and just see status. Like, sometimes that's what people want. I also highly recommend things like status reports. Like, you just set up a schedule and you have a real communication plan, and you send regular status reports to your leadership team so that and these are like 1-pagers, 2-pagers. But in terms of like getting things done, it really is about, collaborating and finding it. Now that I work with much smaller organizations, there are some people who love Trello. There are other people who love Slack. It really, I use Evernote for my own stuff. I really think it is, again, about looking at everything that's out there and, making some organizational decisions about how decisions happen and how you communicate, and then finding the tool that best fits that need. And that's actually how I make my living. Is I don't have like a certain widget that I sell. I actually talk to people and then help them figure out what will fit their organization best.
And I always like to say there's no such thing. Any cookie cutter is not a good solution, right? And that's basically what you're boiling it down to. It's what will work for one organization necessarily won't work for another. So no, that's great. Jen, I got one last question, which I ask all my guests here at Moving for Leadership podcast. Whoo, man, I cannot talk, and I'm still leaving that in for fun. What makes a great leader in your mind?
Oh, wow. Wow. I think that it is someone who has, the vision and can think big, but also understands that it takes everybody in order to make it happen. And so that requires a certain level of openness and understanding. I've worked for bosses that have open door policies for anybody in an organization that would have 5 minutes for anyone. And those are the organizations that really seem to move things forward, is when you have that openness and that compassion and that ability to navigate between that feeling of always needing to be right and then realizing that you can't possibly always be right.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff. You got to drop the ego, right?
Yeah. Self-awareness, baby. All the way.
All the way. Awesome. All right. This time we're going to fire the mic over to you, although you've done most of the talking today. Anyway, where can people find you? How can they reach out? Your resources, shameless plug. Feel free to take a couple minutes and, just go ahead and promote yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. You can find me at jenmcfarland.com, and I have something called Jen's Picks on my website. It's geared toward smaller organizations so that they can get all of the foundational products that will really help them grow, because asking your buddies on Facebook is really not the way to go. I also have a podcast called The Third Paddle with Jen McFarland. We talk about transformational journeys and equity issues. And we're really helping people kind of bridge some of those gaps so that they can implement change in their own lives. Because sometimes when you just learn about how other people have gone from point A to point B, it can really help you make changes in your own life or in your own organization. And that's it. Active blog, active podcast.
Awesome. For the audience, that there's always, it's going to be easy for you guys. Just go to movingforwardleadership.com/6666. And all those links are going to be in the show notes because I'm already doing them as we talked. Jen, again, it's been great having you here. It's been awesome conversation. You know what? Change management. The world's changing all the time. I say it always. The world might have changed while we're on this podcast interview, and we just don't know it yet until we check our phones, right? But we got to do it, and you got to do it right, because if you're not changing, you're not surviving, and organization's going to be dying. So thanks again for taking your time, coming out, speaking to me, speaking to the audience. It's much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview there with Jen. It was definitely a great conversation I had with her. As always, if this show or episode means anything to you, remember R², S². Rate and review so that others, we can help others here at the Moving Forward Leadership Podcast. And that's what we're all about, just helping others become better leaders. So rate and review the show so others can find it. S, share this with someone who's currently going through some change in their organization, who's about to lead some change. So hopefully it helps them execute that change that much easier. And finally, as I said in the intro, subscribe, because you don't want to miss another episode of the podcast. And you can simply do that by going to movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. That's all I got for today, folks. As always, keep pushing, keep trying, keep moving forward. Take care now.